Another surprising fact that not many know about the Tower of London is that it has two chapels. Now there's this one, which is seen by most visitors when they come to the Tower of London. It's over in the corner and it's called St Peter ad Vincula. There is a second chapel which is in the White Tower, which is that building you can see right in front of you, and probably one of the most famous buildings here at the Tower of London. But today we're going into this one, St Peter ad Vincula, and we will do the other one another time when we cover the White Tower. Also known as the Chapel Royal of St Peter's ad Vincula, and it's the Tower's parish church. It's witnessed all sides of community life and has served as a burial place for queens and saints, as well as yeoman warders and mint workers as well, and we've covered that in a previous video. It's amazing to think that the kings and queens have all sat in here and listened to this organ play in front of them over the years gone by, starting, as it says here, with William III and Mary II in 1699. Now it's interesting because there are a couple of tombs around, but you wouldn't expect the people that they are. So this was one of the first warders who actually oversaw the construction of the church for Henry VIII. I mentioned earlier that the chapel is the resting place of queens gone by, so Queen Anne Boleyn, Catherine Howard, both of Henry VIII, and also Lady Jane Grey, who was queen for no more than 8 days. The chapel was founded before the Norman invasion and the construction of the White Tower. Originally it was a church for local people, and it was eventually taken within the tower's walls and has acted as a place of religious worship for the men and women who lived and worked in the castle ever since. As you'll have seen in some of the previous videos, not everything is the original, but the chapel we're in now was erected in 1520 by Henry VIII, which replaced an earlier chapel on the same site, which had been destroyed by fire. Since then, the interior has had many additions and alterations, with several monuments erected to the dead. So I mentioned the queens earlier that were buried here, but the chapel's most famous graves, however, had no markers until the 19th century, when the chapel was renovated. Under Henry VIII, the chapel became the last resting place for many of the Tower's executed prisoners, such as Thomas More and Thomas Cromwell, as well as two of Henry VIII's wives, which were Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. At the end of this video, I'll show you outside the chapel and you can see how close the execution block was. But during the 1876 renovations, the area under the altar, which we've shown you already, was excavated and the remains of several people were found, and they were identified as high-profile status prisoners, including Anne Boleyn. During the visit to the chapel, you can only go on the ground floor. You can't get into the crypt. But that is kept as a place for private worship and reflection for those living here on site at the Tower of London. This memorial in front of us is the memorial to John Holland, who was the constable of the Tower in the 15th century. Now the chapel's crypt is in the door to the right, and that's important because they actually include the remains of famous saints, Thomas More, who was Henry VIII's Lord Chancellor, and also John Fisher, who was the Bishop of Rochester. Now in 1535, Henry VIII imprisoned both men in the Bell Tower because they refused to accept him as the head of the church. They were later that year executed. So as you come out of the chapel, you have the White Tower right in front of you, fantastic views over to Tower Bridge. But next I'm going to show you the monument that I talked about earlier, which is where the executions happened in the Tower of London, which is here, which is marked by this glass pillow, which was a monument which was put in place by Queen Victoria as a way of commemorating what had happened here. And of course, there right in front of you, we have the chapel that we've just been into. So what did you think of the chapel here at the Tower of London, or one of the two chapels? And did it surprise you that it was rebuilt by Henry VIII way back when and it's still in its original form? Well, I hope you've enjoyed the video. Now, if you love things like this, then I've left a video link to our tour of Westminster Abbey, where lots of kings and queens have been buried.